especially if there's no retirement plan for Putin.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's interesting from your book, there's things that are seen by one side as you're deterring the other side, are often seen as the other side as a provocation, where the embargoes from the US are seen as Japan as a deadline to attack. People who are less sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause have said extending NATO, which we thought would be deterrence, is that was actually a provocation for Putin.
First of all, I think you should look at the people living in the countries in question. So before we decide that we're the important people in the world, Americans, or we're in Britain now, or Britons, and therefore anyone in between doesn't count, I believe that's wrong. So all of the countries that joined NATO desperately wanted to join NATO, right? And they've had a whole history of Russians doing terrible things to them. I'm not making it up. This is what Russia's been up to. They have been correct that Russia is going to do more terrible things. They were correct doing everything they could to get into NATO. It's incredible. In my lifetime, I'm remembering what the standards of living of people in Eastern Europe that the Soviet Union had dominated and what it is now. Since they have been freed of Soviet domination, it's been massive compounding of standards of living. It's allowed people your age to travel the world, allowed to have aspirations in their lives, right?
There's no podcasting.
But if when you talk about, should we deny these things because we got some egos in Russia that want to maintain a continental empire? Now, I cannot, or you cannot change how Russians think about things, right? The Russians have to, how they think about the things, that's their decision. But if you look at Europe as a peninsula, you're better off with more insulation from Russia than not.
But isn't this another case of the not thinking in terms of both halves of the court in tennis, where compared to the possibility of nuclear war, just nudging that number up and down matters far more than whether another country in Eastern Europe gets to be part of NATO or not?
Well, I think what was hoped, and hope has been said not to be a strategy, the hope was that trying to get Russia to join the party. So trying to integrate their energy supplies into Europe, paying them good money for it, have them make lots of money on that, hoping that they would invest this into their road system, which is lamentable, and hoping that they would invest this to cleaning out their business laws, which are, it's horrendous trying to run a business there. As you watched right now, as different things get nationalized and taken over, and different business leaders who are successful wind up unaccountably dropping out of sixth-floor windows and things, or old people always seem to fall downstairs. I think that's a special way of offing people. That was the hope, is join the party, because you will become wealthy too. Russian standards of living have been stagnating for quite a while. That Putin's model of the basically taking over your neighbor's stuff and then whatever you have a bomb flat bringing home it's not an efficient way to make wealth. And you're killing so many people. So I don't believe that we in the West have this denying people of Eastern Europe, saying, hey, well, actually, because the Russians have such an attitude, you get to be their serfs forever.
Or I guess it's not about, not that it's just, but there are broader considerations for the same reason that you were talking about earlier, that would not have made sense for Americans. It would have not been plausible that we would have kept fighting further to prevent the Eastern Europe at the time from succumbing to the Red Army.
The Ukrainians are doing the fighting right now.
Supplied by tremendous amounts of Western aid.
They are, but that's pennies on the dollar. They're willing to fight for their country.
It's not about the cost to the United. It's not like the 40 billion or whatever. It's the how does this nudge the nuclear war probabilities?
Well, what's the nuclear war going to do, Putin? The Ukrainian forces are dispersed. What's the target? It's going to be Kyiv, I suppose.
Or I don't know. He thinks that he's out of options, so let's go bomb NATO headquarters or something.
I think the Chinese have whispered in his ear, and this is pure speculation, is, buddy, if you do this, everybody on the planet is going to get nuclear weapons, and all of a sudden we aren't going to have this little small club of people with nuclear weapons, and the consequences are going to be rather horrendous. And also look at China. It has more nuclear armed neighbors than anyone on the planet, and some of them are totally nuts.
Putin himself, right?
Well,
and
no,
Pakistan.
I would think, oh, well,
North Korea.
let's try North Korea for
Yeah.
a country that's got starvation in the 21st century. How did you do it?
Although on this point, another thing your books have emphasized is how often leaders make mistakes that make make very little strategic sense and are very stupid. You could imagine, even though it would be very stupid for Putin to escalate, especially if he personally is going to be, there's no retirement plan. I could imagine him doing very stupid things.
Well, let's put stupid out of it because it's not explanatory by saying, well, someone's stupid, because it means you write off understanding their reasoning. So a lot of Westerners, when they think of governments, think about governments operating in the interest of their population. So when their decisions don't improve standards of living, security, and things, then we say those aren't good decisions. All right, but that's not the game. In China, for instance, it's all about maintaining the monopoly of the Chinese Communist Party to rule. And if that conflicts with having higher living standards, you better believe they're choosing Communist Party. So you're watching those kind of decisions going on right now, where their most talented entrepreneurs are being relieved of their enterprises. Or Putin, as you said, he's made a pivotal error. He has no back down plan. He only has a double down plan. Expect him to double down forever. And then the question is whether all the oligarchs want to keep doubling down with him and his generals, or whether they, I don't know, give him something extra in his Cheerios some morning. Who knows?
So I feel like this is one of the lessons you were actually talking about earlier, where you don't want somebody to feel like they're up against the wall, where even if it would be an unjust sort of resolution, some sort of ceasefire where Putin can save face, I wonder if your sort of historical lessons would bring you to that conclusion.
Oh, and Putin, he will be back for more, and understand that that's just the case.
But then what is the solution? We can't have unconditional surrender unless we're
No one's marching on Moscow.
right.
The United States has done this for many years, is you don't recognize the territories that he's taken, which means the Russians are stuck with a sanction regime of some type forever. And you go, oh, well, that'll weaken. Certain people won't adhere to it. It will depress Russian growth forever, which goes back to an earlier part of this conversation of it's really powerful. And it was some Russians who themselves, when at the very beginning, said, oh, no, we are going to be like North Korea. Yeah, you will be. That's exactly where he's heading them. We don't control when the Russians reassess. We can't even predict when or whether they'll reassess. We can't predict whether there'll be some kind of incipient civil war in Russia, right? Which would be, well, destabilizing by definition. Who knows how that goes? One of the things you asked me in an email about is whether superior finances wins wars or something. It's superior alliance systems that win wars. And it's interesting that the Europeans, particularly the Eastern Europeans, are the leaders of all this. And isn't it fascinating that the Finns and the Swedes, who forever were neutral, are now all over this? And they know. So what is it? The enemy gets a vote. The Russians have a vote. As long as the Russians are playing this game, our best bet is to support Ukrainians. Because unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, where the locals did not do the bulk of the fighting, this is when the locals are. And that's key on whether you also were emailing me and asking me about successful versus unsuccessful interventions. When the locals do all the fighting, that's when your best odds are of helping them.
Yeah.